Hi, girly pops. It's Zoe London from Proverbs, and we are on episode 3. I'm just gonna call them episodes. Um, I think it's fun. Of our Bible study, and yeah, I am really excited. I'm really enjoying these so far. I have a little tickle on my nose. Sorry about that. Also, I feel like my giant forehead, it looks okay in the context of like this kind of outfit because it's very like Elizabethan Renaissance, like my people, like because I'm like super Anglo-Saxon. So like it looks okay that I have like a giant forehead and no eyebrows because perhaps it's like I'm sitting for a portrait. In all honesty, I was never self-conscious about my forehead until last summer when I started making reels, and all of a sudden, a whole bunch of people were commenting about my forehead, and I was like, I didn't. I didn't know it was that big. So now I'm a little bit self-conscious, but you know what? I'm working it. I think it's fine in this context. It's also totally starting to get very golden hour-y. So I'm gonna sit and I'm gonna look like this while I talk to you girlies. So that way I don't get like a bunch of really dark circles under my eyes. We're learning as we go. So this chunk of Proverbs chapter 1, we're going to talk about the concept of wisdom and how wisdom is described in the rest of Proverbs. So we're going to go from verse 20 to verse 33. And if you watch the first little episode, oh my God, it was a marathon. One of the contextual pieces that I mentioned was that the book of Proverbs, it ends up being very similar to the art of war by, what is it, Sun Tzu? Where once you get into it, it's really like one verse, two verses says what you need to say, and then it just kind of continues onward. And so there's a lot that we can talk about that's really great from that. But again, we're still in that introduction phase where we're discussing sort of the really basic parts of what's the book of Proverbs about? Why are we talking about it? We talked about very fundamental concepts of like a good choice versus an evil choice in the last episode. And then the first episode, we talked a little bit about why wisdom is really helpful in terms of learning from another person's mistakes or another person's advice, instead of having to, fuck around and find out for yourself. And one of the coolest things about the Bible, one of the things that has been so helpful for me, because like as a Christian, I don't go to church, but I read the Bible every day. It's just as much a super duper 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 helpful guidebook on how to be a good person and live a successful and good life as it is in terms of spirituality. And when it comes to wisdom, you can trust the wisdom that comes from God because of the fact that you never have to worry about any advice that God gives you justifying God's own experiences. All of God's advice is going to be directly straight for what is best for you because God doesn't feel the need to justify any of his own mistakes or anything because he's God, right? Like he's not a person. And that's really, really helpful because it means that whenever I feel like I don't know what to do about this, that, or the other, I always consult the Bible. I always use the Bible app. This is not an ad. I definitely don't have enough followers on YouTube yet, enough subscribers yet. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to have any paid app ads yet. But I actually I straight up love the Bible app because there's so many different plans where it's like, I'm worrying about this or I'm worrying about that. I can literally look it up in the app and there's plans. And if anybody wants to use the Bible app and they want to add me, I'll figure out how to put like my little username in it because you can do plans with each other and stuff. It's really cool. Yeah, so we talked about why wisdom from God is good wisdom. Over here. We talked about what a good and a bad choice was. And now we're going to talk about what wisdom is itself. It's pretty well structured, the book of Proverbs. So in the book of Proverbs, there's a consistent metaphor, or it's not a metaphor. I remember this from English class. It's personification, where, yeah, we're talking about God as a guy, as like your holy father, whatever. There's this little piece of hair that's bothering me. And we're talking about now, sorry, I'm so bad at looking at the camera also. Really sorry about that. I'm working on that. Now, in the book of Proverbs, wisdom we talk about as a woman. Because again, in the Bible, super duper shocked me. Women are people. And women are just as valid as men, which is exactly what it aligns with my general beliefs too, which is so cool. So this is a bit of a handful, bit of a mouthful. Gonna see if I can get through it. Wisdom crieth without. She uttereth her voice in the streets. She crieth in the chief place of concourse. In the openings of the gates. In the city she uttereth her words, saying, How long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? And the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Question mark at the end. Turn you at my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words to you. Unto you, sorry. Because I have called, and ye refused, I have stretched out my hand, and no man regarded. But ye have set at naught all my counsel, and would none of my reproof. I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. When your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind. When distress and anguish cometh upon you, then they shall call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me, for that they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, which again isn't fear. It's more like fatherly respect that obviously he wants what's best for you. He's God. He's not like a guy. That's just sort of what that is. It's not like fire and brimstone, blah, blah, blah. There's metaphors, but I don't believe that it's just like he's going to shoot you with a lightning bolt gun. You know what I mean? They would none of my counsel. They despised all of my reproof. Therefore, they shall eat the fruit of their own way and be filled with their own devices. That's sort of where the concept of eating the fruits of your own labor comes from. Fun fact. I didn't know that until I read the Bible. I was like, that's cool. For the turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. But whoso hearkeneth, but whoso hearkeneth unto me shall dwell safely, and shall be quiet from fear of evil. So, in the first episode, first YouTube video, I don't know what to call them, I mentioned how it was really important and really probably the best call to get advice from other people and learn from the mistakes of others and the wisdom of others instead of going the whole fuck around and find out for yourself route. Because again, and this is not to scare anybody, so many mistakes in life are so easily rectified. If you do harm against somebody and you didn't realize, you can just apologize. If you took the wrong path, you can just change it around. And it's so easy. As somebody who I've had to fuck around and find out for myself a lot in life. And I have failed miserably like so many times, but I've also succeeded a lot of times. And the successes that I have gained in life, those successes are directly from the wisdom that I've learned through my own experiences. But when you are dealing with stuff like, for example, the motorcycle helmet example that I used, if people are telling you when you ride your motorcycle that you need to wear a helmet, and you're like, I'm not going to wear a helmet, that looks stupid, you're going to eat the fruits of your own labor when you get into an accident and you die, right? There are some situations in life, and there will be situations in life, and there are mistakes in life that aren't even so much mistakes often as they're conscious choices to do the wrong thing. And when you make conscious choices to do the wrong thing, and you make the choice not to listen to wisdom, you make the choice to do the wrong thing, motorcycle, not wearing a helmet example. When calamity strikes you, you get into a car accident, there's nothing more that God can do for you other than, if you're a good person, make sure that you go to heaven and stuff like that, right? But there's nothing more in that circumstance that God can do for you when your head is split open on the pavement because you've made such a conscious choice to not listen to any of the wisdom that was given to you. I remember when I was a kid, my stepbrothers and I always got an absolute sort of warped sense of entertainment and comedy from there was like a Darwin Award website. I bet I could find it. I'm going to try to find it. And if I can, I'm going to put it in a link under this video. This concept of the Darwin Award, when you look at it from a scientific, Darwin theory of evolution, right? A big thing in the theory of evolution is that members of species that adopt evolutionarily, positive traits that are useful for their survival, they're the ones that survive. And the members of the species that do not possess, or in humanity's case, because so much about wisdom is a constant, or not a constant, but a conscious evolution of the self, right? To be able to use as many tools and wisdom as possible to evolve your life and yourself as much as possible. People that actively choose against that in like the most obvious, what were you doing, what the fuck ways, and they died, there was a website for Darwin Awards. And a lot of it had to do with, the person who was like so adamant against wearing seatbelts, even though like everybody was like, you need to wear a seatbelt in a car, because if you get into an accident and you're not wearing a seatbelt, your chance of dying is so much higher than if you just wore a seatbelt. What does this do against you? What does a seatbelt do that is bad for you, right? And then, the person whose whole life was about, I don't like seatbelts, dies in a car accident because he's like flown 40 feet and I don't know, lands on a Burger King sign or something. You know what I mean? That is in Proverbs, this concept. And it's really important to know because, again, the one thing about learning from the wisdom of others is that you don't have the experiential understanding of how bad it is when you fuck around and find out that it's bad, right? So the only thing about not listening to the wisdom of others that can be very easy to fall into is I don't really believe it, but something going wrong is probably not that big of a deal, right? And then, since you literally hate knowledge, like the person who was like, I don't want to wear a seatbelt, looks stupid. Like, you know what I mean? There's no choice. There's no choice but for wisdom to laugh and for God to be like, I did what I could. I told you what I could, right? Yeah. So wisdom is really important. And when you gain wisdom, when you learn wisdom, when you hear wisdom, you want to take it to heart as much as possible. And you don't want to be like that person that's like, but I don't know if I believe it, right? And that is where the concept of a fool comes in, because not fearing the Lord, it's not about being scared of some guy that's going to strike lightning down on you and fire and brimstone and blah, blah, blah. It's about not respecting God's authority, or in the case of things like wearing a seatbelt, it's about not respecting the fact that everybody that's telling you to wear a seatbelt is doing it because they have your best interest at heart, right? So one thing that I think is important contextually in terms of wisdom, and this is the last thing that I'm going to talk about in this video because I don't want my videos to be like half an hour long if possible, because I get bored of listening to myself talk, and I'm sure that you probably might too. In terms of wisdom, I think it's also really important in terms of giving yourself grace. And this is one thing that's big in the Bible, God's grace and giving yourself grace of making mistakes and stuff like that. It's also important to recognize, especially these days, where there's such a glut of information online. And it's another reason why I like going straight to the source. I don't know if I don't know what to do. I literally look it up in the Bible. Because I trust that it will lead me the right way, right? There's so much misinformation. There's so many opinions disguised as facts. And there's also so much fearful advice and quote unquote wisdom that is given. We see it so often with guys, right? Where this whole concept of incels, and I want to talk about this in a later series actually, because like I love guys. Some of my best friends are guys. I have brothers. I love guys as people. I'm not scared of men. But a lot of women, when we don't have any experience with guys in a non-romantic, non-sexual context, it can be very tough not to be afraid of guys for obvious reasons, right? But we see it with guys, with incels, with Andrew Tate, alpha male, blah, 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 where you're looking at it from the outside and you're like, this is so inherently wrong. Like, you know what I mean? This is obviously such horrible advice. But for girls, I have noticed in terms of like a lot of like the femme fatale content, some of the sort of sprinkle stuff, I think it's very important to have high standards. And again, this is why I personally like in terms of having in terms of having high standards of how you are treated by others in your personal life in general. Persephone's mind, she's perfect. She gets right to the point. She's cut and dry, and she teaches everything. She gives all of her advice from that foundation of self-respect that also assumes that you treat others with respect until they give you reason to remove yourself from them, right? And then in terms of the Wizard Liz, all of her advice surrounding having standards in your relationships, like it's literally the best advice that I have seen like ever involving having high standards for yourself, because it's not about like scamming. You know what I mean? I'm finding that a lot of advice towards women in terms of like getting a high value man or whatever and stuff like that, it's getting very scammy. And it's like you want to be with a partner who's high value in that like they're respectful and they're kind and they're driven, and especially in terms of relationship dynamics, division of domestic labor and stuff like that. Ideally, you do want a man that does have a recognition of the inherent emotional and domestic labor as a woman that you do, and that there should be a slightly skewed or a more skewed towards financial providership from guys, just on the basic tenets of like chivalry, making sure that everybody is pulling their weight and stuff like that. But this concept of like straight up scamming guys is like, that's terrible advice. And it doesn't matter if you're a girl and he's a guy. Don't scam people, and don't try to use people for their money, and don't try to get as much money as you can from somebody, because it's scamming them. So that is an example of like, sometimes advice is not, sometimes advice is not wisdom, and sometimes wisdom is not packaged as advice. And that I think is something that's very important, and that's touched upon and continued upon in the book of Proverbs in terms of how to identify true wisdom versus advice that either leads you down a not good path, identifying what the not good paths are. And then when you have access to advice, which again, like if you need access, this is the shit, or like really any form of scripture that you follow, it's both for me very much in terms of faith, but also really, really, really good, wise advice. I think that's really important. Also, the last thing that I will say in terms of giving yourself grace in engineering, one of the things that we have to learn consistently ethically is that when you're working on a big project, because a lot of large engineering projects involving big buildings, involving planes or trains or cars or rockets, or you know what I mean, anything involving that, if it messes up, it could cause serious loss of life, right? And so we have to take courses corresponding to every level of engineering that you're in, that involve both ethics, professionality, and also like writing and communications. It's usually wrapped up in the same course, at least at Mac where I am. And one of the big examples that they consistently touch upon, I might get the numbers messed up. If I get the numbers messed up, I'll just put it in the bio with the right numbers. Is the Challenger mission that was by NASA. And what happened, this was, I think, late 90s, maybe early 2000s, a lot of things. They were messing up a lot of things in the late 90s, early 2000s involving engineering. But it was this big rocket mission where there were 5 NASA astronauts on board, and every single life is very valuable. That being said, though, also just like in context of like, these are NASA astronauts. You have to be like one in a bajillion to be able to be an astronaut, right? So these are people that would have otherwise had an extremely profoundly positive impact on humanity and the survival of our species in all forms of their work going forward as well. Again, not that any loss of life is okay, but just contextually, really bad. So the Challenger mission, it exploded. I'm pretty sure it exploded like when it take off pretty much immediately. And the reason that it exploded was because one of the O-rings, so there's like a bunch of rings around the rocket that all cause it to lift, right? One of the O-rings failed, and that caused just cascade, blah, blah, blah. Everybody died. And it was horrific. It was a tragedy, and it was entirely preventable because of the fact that, well, maybe not entirely, because, you know, the business and the control might have pushed it through anyway, but hopefully they wouldn't. From the engineering standpoint, we like to assume that they wouldn't. But there was a 1 in 8 chance that one of the O-rings was going to fail. And when the engineers tried to communicate this to the non-engineers on the sort of control side, we're deciding whether or not this goes or not, they did not clarify that 1 in 8 was 13%. And it was that misclarification officially that caused the control center or the people in charge to be like, no, that's fine. We're going to let the mission go, because they didn't realize how high 1 in 8 was in terms of a numerical percentage. So, and that's something that, you know, it was a horrific tragedy. And in engineering, it's one of those things that we consistently reference in terms of making sure that we communicate properly. So I also don't want to scare anybody in terms of doom and gloom, especially younger girls, maybe girls in their teens. Life is not, again, unless you're going on motorcycles without wearing helmets, unless you're going out of your way to not wear seatbelts in cars, stuff like that, you're going to be fine. And mistakes that you make in life as a good person, those are totally fine. Life always has its ups and downs. Hopefully the advice that I give will make your life and the ups and downs that you face in life much more manageable, hopefully negligible, ideally negligible, because I also want to talk about things like financial literacy, education, drought preparedness, making sure that you kind of, one thing that I'm known for, I'm not really great with like dating and stuff like that. I don't know, I like my projects, you know what I mean? And I'm not really somebody that gets a lot of joy from like interpersonal dynamics. Most of the research that I do on interpersonal dynamics is just to like understand how people work, because I'm pretty aspy. But what I'm known for in my personal life is that I have my shit together, and that I've gone through a lot of stuff, but I have my shit together. And so hopefully I have a small but positive impact on your lives to make sure that you don't go through any of the pitfalls that I do, and that it's easier for you to set yourselves up for success, financial security, all that good stuff. Yeah, I'm not great with boys, but I bought my first house, only house so far, when I was 21. So like with my dad, but it was the only house that my family had. It's the only house that my family has. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, you can. I know that you can. So I think it's really important to just remember as we go through, the younger you are, the more fatalistic everything can seem and the scarier everything can seem. And I just want to make it really clear that if you're watching this video, I'm sure that you're already pretty committed to being a good person. Maybe you're one of the few people that's committed to like really making fun of me all the time. And if you are, then like I don't care. But yeah, if you're doing this because you're committed to being a good person, you're not going to mess up your life so profoundly that wisdom has no choice but to laugh. But it is important to make sure that, you know, it's not in your best interest to go out of your way to be a really shitty person. This whole concept of like, you should be able to crash out at least once, you deserve it, stuff like that. Mm-mm. You should always, always, always. That doesn't mean that everything in life is going to be easy. It doesn't mean that there's never going to be any disagreements. It doesn't mean that you're never going to have to deal with people who don't have your best interests at heart, or people that are committed to acting extremely, extremely shittily. But when you do deal with those, you're always going to be approaching it from a perspective of, even if you don't have that maturity yourself yet, you can gain wisdom, and you can use that wisdom to be able to guide you into making a good choice. But yes, please make sure that you have grace with yourself. A lot of times, wisdom isn't necessarily the easiest to recognize versus advice that might not be wise, right? And again, that's another reason that I totally love this book. We'll go into the spiritual aspect of it as well more, or I might make a couple of videos specifically on that. But I think that any girls, any people that have an actual like spirituality, actual faith that they view as a foundational pillar of their lives, they also are well aware of the fact that following the scriptures, following the teachings of that faith, and actually truly following the teachings of that faith it's very, very, very helpful in ensuring that you know what wisdom is, you know what kind of wisdom endures, because this stuff is like very, very old, right? But it's very applicable today. Yeah, and you will be able to learn, because a big part of Proverbs is showing you what wisdom is and who wisdom is in this personification of wisdom as a woman, versus what wisdom is not, where you will find wisdom, where wisdom will not be. And it will help you be able to make wiser choices. And yeah, cool. Okay, so that is video 3. I hope that my head doesn't look super tiny, even if my hair looks flat. I know that my forehead is, I know that my forehead's doing her best to make sure that my head doesn't look abnormally small for my body. So, yeah, I hope that you really enjoyed the video. This is really fun so far. I hope that you guys are liking it. Cool.